Hi, my name is Brian Farr, and I'm the lead sound designer on the world of Warcraft. Sound design is very crucial in all games. The main thing that we always try to accomplish is an epic sound, but not too epic and not too light. And it's very hard to explain. There's a very fine line between a cinematic and a video game. We're dealing with repetition and things being played over and over, so we have to create sounds that all together in one blend as an epic sound. So in the world, we've added close to 80 different ambience loops. By having a large variety of ambience, we've been able to give each zone its own realistic feel. Creating the ambience for Lordaeron, we wanted to bring back the fall of King Tyrannus during the Act 3 cinematic from Warcraft 3. The goal was to achieve a haunting experience from where the return of Arthas led to the doom of the kingdom. So as you enter the gates through Lordaeron, you could first see this giant bell laying on the ground, so we wanted to bring in the sound of these corrupt bells ringing in the distance, very ghostly sounding. And coming through the halls, we have the crowd in here where you can hear them chanting in the distance and slowly turning into like zombies. And we wanted to scare the listener as much as possible to give that haunting feel of when he returned home. Entering the gates, you come through the doors into the chamber. You can stand in here for a while and you'll start to hear actual pieces from the cinematics in the original Warcraft 3 series. You can hear everything up to when Arthas slain his own father, and these ghosts are moving around. So with ambience, we were able to bring this back, and that's one of the many things we were able to do. Within this world, we have close to 80 different ambience loops, and that's a lot of ambience if you really think about it. We tried our best to bring ambience into every zone that looked different, and each thing, of course, is broken down between a night and day ambience. Dungeons as well, any of the major dungeons with portals into different areas, we tried our best to give them their own vibe and their own eerie feel. Or if you're in Elwyn Forest, we tried to bring birds into it and make it seem happy and enchanted. And if you go into a dark area, we wanted to bring as many dark things into that as we possibly can get, from owls or pitching things way down low to make them sound scary. Since this game is so massive and so many things go on at one time, we have to make sure that each creature has its own set of really cool sounds. So creating monsters is a very big challenge. We try to strive for anything that we can get from the designers. First off, where do they come from? What is their purpose in the world? What do they eat? What do they breathe? Where do they sleep? Where would they be? What can we do to make this creature come to life? So we start a layering process. Usually we have an actor come in, or one of us from the sound team, and we start grunting into the microphone and creating these creatures, such as like a bog beast. We took elements of mud. We took scrunching of a sponge to create a wet sound underneath it, and then under that like a moaning, groaning sound. And then we layer these things together to create all the monsters that you see in WoW. And we have close to over 100 different sound sets for these monsters. Each monster has 9 to 12 different sounds. So if you add that up, that's a lot of different sounds to it. We do our best to try to keep things from being repetitive. So it's a challenge to us to create these monsters, to keep them from sounding the same, since players are going to sit there and fight these creatures over and over. And I think we've really had a lot of success. I'm going to demonstrate for you the layering process of how it sounds before we process a creature, and this is the death of the dragon. It's going to start off with the actual recording of the actor, and then it's going to go into the final processing, and then all the layers together. So you'll hear 7 layers unprocessed and 7 layers processed to the final sound of the dragon death. In combat, it's broken down into weapons, spells, and unarmed attacks. We also have biting sounds for creatures such as wolves and dragons, and then each weapon has its own unique sound. Also, if you put on chainmail or plate mail, if a monster hits you with that axe or a sword, your actual sound of your impact that you get changes as well. You'll hear the chains ringing off your armor or the plate, you'll hear it thud. And if you're not wearing armor at all or leather, it's more of a, heavy sound hitting flesh. So we have all these different sounds combined that create this really cool feel of the game when you're playing in battle. Also, we've given bows not only just your pullback sound and the impact, but when you shoot your arrow off, you can hear the actual whiz of the sound go right past your ears. This works alongside also spells. Everything in a game that moves, in combat that you use, such as a throwing axe or anything, they all have sounds while in midair, so you'll hear an axe fly right by you using a Doppler effect. Also, based on the type of armor you're wearing, you can hear the armor actually moving as you run or walk or whatever. Leather has more of like a scrunching sound when you run, and then also you can hear the chains on your armor ringing as you jog along the road or whatever. It's a really cool effect. I think it brings in a lot of realism. Also, footsteps. We've gone so far with footsteps. I mean, if you're a small character in the game or a small creature, you'll hear their footsteps being lighter on grass or dirt or stone or snow. And if you're a medium to large character, such as a night elf or a tauren, you'll hear a different, weight of footsteps on the ground as well. And then this goes all the way up to like a Kodo beast or a dragon. They all have their own footsteps. It also applies to wings. If you hear a bird flapping, their wings are going to be a different weight. You'll hear, your griffin that you're riding on the back of, it's going to have giant wing flaps. And then if you're standing next to a more like a vulture type creature, it's not going to have as heavy flaps. It's going to be these light flaps. Things such as crabs, little crabs that walk on the sand, you'll hear different footsteps. Anything that is different in the game with different textures, we've tried to give it completely different footsteps as well. Also, if your character dies, you fall over, you hit the ground, it's going to make the sound of the grass. It's going to make the sound of the dirt, whatever you fall on. And that's also based on the weight of the creature, such as small, medium, or a dragon falling. And this is created, once again, another realistic feel during combat. Doodads in the game, doodads is what we call basically game objects, such as a fire or a door that opens or a lever that you pull in the game. We've added sounds to all of these, and there's thousands of things with sounds active currently in the game. And we've tried to, anything that moves in the game, to give it some sort of sound. So when you run by it or near it, or you pull this lever, or you use this book and this scroll, anything in the game we've added sound to. And nowadays in games, you can do so much more, and we're trying to push this game over the top to being one of the best sounding games out there.
Hi, I'm Jason Hayes, and I'm the lead composer on World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft provided some interesting challenges that are a little bit different than some of my other experiences. Just lately, that's been a lot of the cinematics for the games and the trailers that promote them. Since StarCraft, I've done a lot of that kind of thing, and World of Warcraft, not only is it an in-game experience, but it's a massively multiplayer role-playing game, which means that people are going to be playing for a long time, hopefully. I mean, we would hope for years. So even trying to think of how you would even begin to put music behind that kind of experience is a little bit daunting. So I think early on it was something that we decided that we didn't want to have massive bombastic music playing all the time in the background, because the idea is that would get really tiresome fast if you had to listen to that all the time, even if it's very good music. So the concept that I came up with for it was that we would do something that would try to be a little less linear than typical music. Instead of going from point A to point B on this musical journey, like when I write a piece of music, I guess it's usually kind of like that if I try to analyze it. Instead, trying to kind of bask in one aesthetic moment and kind of stay in that state. So if you're up on this mountain looking at this snowy vista, you just have this one kind of feeling. And if you started the music at the beginning, it would feel like you're just kind of getting the feeling of being in this moment of seeing the snowy landscape. And if you started, a minute and a half into it, it would kind of sound like the same thing. It just like it's like it would always be in that one moment, which made it a little bit easier to fade in this music and then fade it out, hopefully so that you wouldn't really feel like you've just now kicked in the beginning of this composition. More like you were just kind of fading in on the feeling of being in that area and getting a sense, maybe a more dramatic sense of the reality of standing there. At least that's what we were trying to accomplish. Then in addition to all the atmospheric kind of stuff, we were looking for opportunities to kind of punctuate the gameplay experience with things that were a little bit more thematic and a little bit more epic, where we could get away with saying something of a little bit more substance musically. So where we elected to do that was in places like cities. When you first enter a city, thinking of that in movie terms as being like an establishing shot, where all of a sudden, you arrive and you kind of see the first shot and you can get this theme that maybe represents the people that live in the city. And then beyond that, of course, in instance dungeons, and you have these really fantastic encounters that take place that are very dangerous or exciting, we wanted the opportunity to play some more action-oriented or battle-oriented music, knowing that those particular occasions that would be warranted. Of course, you don't want to be out in the middle of a field killing snakes and have that sound massive and epic, because it's not. It's not an epic event. So we wanted to save these little action-oriented moments for like the really special encounters in the game and other special moments. Certain areas also in the world that have special significance because you've just happened upon maybe something famous from the Warcraft lore. We were going to have a little musical intro to kind of say, wow, I finally hit this really cool place. I think the music in the game ended up being on a continuum from the just super atmospheric, textural stuff to things that are a little bit more melodic. And I tend to get excited about the music in the game that has a little bit more of a melodic or thematic quality to it. It's also my concern that some of that stuff might get old quicker than other pieces, because they just inherently they're going to sound a little more catchy. You're going to remember them better. It's just part of the nature of doing that kind of thing. But I think that kind of music is a little bit more expressive. At the end of the day, with a project like this, I think the main goal is to have a situation where maybe for once people won't want to turn the music off, and if in any way this thing can be so organic to the environment to where it feels like it's just an extension of the lighting effects or, like a fog effect, you just really can't imagine it not being there. That's what I really hope can happen, that people get something out of there being music in the game, because it's fairly apparent to me that after playing this game so long, you need something that can kind of blend in. And it's hard sometimes to resist the temptation to doing really big sounding music, especially at Blizzard, where people really love the large scale, massive moments. And I know for sure in the movies that they do here, that I've worked a lot on those, and that's what they're a big fan of. They're a big fan of the giant, epic moment. So hopefully we have some of that in there as well. But I think over the long haul, having the general gameplay experience be a little bit more ambient is probably a good thing.
I'm Matt Samia, the director of the World of Warcraft cinematic intro. What we have right here for you is a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff. This is stuff that we generally don't release, but this time we just thought it might be kind of cool to show some of the pieces that go into making the finished product. So these are showing off some of the things that we found to be pretty challenging. We had to come up with a whole new way of doing hair because of the dwarf and his crazy beard and braids and all that stuff. And this is showing off some dynamic simulations on the bear fur. We were doing more dynamic simulations, I think, on this show than we had ever done in the past. Every bit of cloth, every bit of fur and hair, and every little dangly thing that was hanging off a character wound up having a simulation and was moving around. You can see even his earrings are moving a bit. We were delving into some new shaders for skin. We think we're getting a little bit better with that. We like the way this dwarf turned out pretty well. These shots were pretty huge and full of all kinds of effects. These characters were probably some of the most complex we'd ever done, which is kind of ironic considering we designed them to be simple, and we were thinking these were not going to be so difficult to get on screen. It's just sort of the nature of these characters. We really couldn't get around the fact that they are just covered in all kinds of baubles and little things and weapons and what have you. This is showing some of the stages of a set in progress. This is This is one of the Night Elf shots from Teldrassil. Here we get a little look at how things work, how they're worked up. These are some of the passes on the Night Elf, showing her animation, and now these are some of the dynamic sims actually being run. You can see how many there are. This is actually cutting out quite a few, in fact. But these are previews of some of them. This is including her hair sim, and then of course with shading and lighting and compositing and all that sort of magic, we get the actual shot. This panther was a real challenge, trying to make a cat move like a real cat. That was something else. You can see his tail, or probably her tail, swirling around there. That's something that we got off footage of an actual panther making this jump, and it turns out a lot of people thought it looked wrong, but it was kind of funny because it was absolutely correct. So we had there was a lot of debate about whether or not we should take that out, even though it was correct in quotes. So this is showing some of the different stages. The level of detail that we were building into these characters this time was really quite high. We were doing things like even building the folds into their clothing, even though they were going to be simulated afterwards. We found that we were getting much better results by actually modeling the folds in, doing some range of motion tests on his face to see what kind of expressions we can get away with. Again, showing off a shot and how we work them up. This is some of the early animation. Now that we're happy with the animation, you can see we're running the sims on all his layers of clothing and his different layers of jewelry and what have you. And what we finally came up with, again, with all the magic added, etc., we rebuilt our orc to be much more like the orc in the game, and just overall bulkier and scarier and cooler. We were really playing with the idea of how to get his muscles to move around, and we finally settled on using an approach that they used in the Hulk film, which was we made morph targets for different flexes, basically, and brought them in and out depending on what he was doing. If you look carefully, as we get these different versions, you can start to see the flexing going on. It's pretty subtle, but it's there, I promise. And again, the finished shot with all the crazy simulations. This is our Tauren. We're pretty proud of this Tauren. We think he's pretty cool. Again, we pretty much rebuilt the Tauren from the last trailer to match more closely the guy in the game. The game art had evolved between the time we did the last one and this one. It's more of the kinds of tests that we do to make sure that everything is working and that we have enough range of expression for his face. And here he is being angry and violent. Again, a shot in progress showing the kinds of things that we get maybe halfway along, where some of the characters are fully shaded and some of them aren't, and we're working up the composite. This was our undead guy. We tried all kinds of things to make him icky and rotting and kind of nasty, and boy, he sure is. He's pretty cool, actually. It's kind of a shame you don't really get to see his eyes too well in the finished shot, because we put some thought and effort into making those eyes look kind of shriveled like old grapes. They're pretty cool. Here he is, animated. These are showing off some of the things that we did for the ground. We were actually playing with the idea of having the plants die off when he takes a step, and they actually do if you look in the shot. Again, it's pretty subtle. There are a lot of things going on in these shots. All the layers of sims. He has some spit hanging off of his lower lip, and that's in there too. This is showing off some of the tests we did for that. In some ways inspired by the alien. If you look closely in the finished shot, you will see that he does, in fact, have some spit hanging there. You got to look closely, but it's in there. It's one of those little touches that we wind up putting in there, and maybe nobody but us knows they're there.
One thing you may notice with World of Warcraft is the characters are really animated, and a lot of that just comes from a traditional 2D animation background carried over into 3D. So one thing that we pride in our animators is just taking it to that next level in 3D. None of our animations are motion captured. We just feel that the World of Warcraft is such an animated and and colorful environment that the hand animation was the only way to kind of really truly, bring it to life.
Between the characters and players, we have about 4,000 unique animations. We have about 2,000 unique player character animations, and we have about 2,000 unique creature animations.
So between the 16 character races, that's male and female, each have about 120 to 130 plus unique hand-done animations.
Each creature has anywhere between 10 and 20 animations, depending on where the creature is going to be used. If it's a boss or a sub-boss, then generally they have more animations, than something like your typical wolf or something along those lines.
And in the case of non-player characters, NPCs, wherever we were able to use one of our player characters as an NPC, well, of course, they're going to, just inherit, those 120 plus unique animations, which is really nice. The designers can do really cool things with quests, having access to all those animations.
We also tried to inject some of the Warcraft humor. Warcraft 3, Warcraft 2, these games have a lot of humorous elements in them, and we wanted to make sure that we captured some of that in the World of Warcraft. A lot of the creatures have, some really unique stances. If you watch a creature for a while, they'll do some really humorous kind of animations. The Sea Giant is a great example because if you watch him long enough, you'll see that he'll actually fart. It's actually very rare, so you have to watch them for a long time, but there's a lot of humorous and very subtle elements in the game.
Here you have this giant, ominous, insanely powerful creature, and yet we'll inject some of that Blizzard humor with the Sea Giant passing wind. Of course, he does it in his own special way. He's a sea giant, so of course a gigantic bubble would come from him, and then he's very inquisitive, so of course he's going to pop that bubble, and of course what it ends with is something, just really unique to what Blizzard does.
Another example is the kobolds. If you watch them, they'll chase their tail every so often. The ogres will scratch their rear end. Each of the player characters has over 25 unique emote animations, and those really help add a lot of character, and in some cases really give each character a sense of humor.
We did have some basic guidelines that we had to stay within. The attack animations had to be a set length. Special attack animations could be a little bit longer. We made sure that weapons made contact at a certain frame rate so that we could make combat look real and believable in the game, so that when you're knowing when a character or creature is going to be hitting, you can time all of your, dodges, blocks, parries to make combat more, lifelike and real.
Yeah, it's really important to have a creature react when a character swings the sword and hits the creature. Without that exact timing, it doesn't come across as realistic and comes across as very fake.
Sometimes it'd be challenging to get the character to hit at a certain frame. In the end, it was just something you got used to, and it really didn't cause any problems.
Another thing, too, with keeping the different animations at a reasonable length is it really helps facilitate gameplay. You don't want the player to be waiting around for an animation to play that's really long. You want to keep things very snappy and at a good pace. When we first started a creature or a character, a lot of times the first thing we would do is try to come up with their neutral stand pose. This is the pose that they're standing in most of the time, and it really conveys a lot of the character. So getting that down first can save a lot of time for animation later on.
Yeah, because sometimes we would take a creature or character just a little bit too far, a little out of the scope of what design, had in mind. And so, to save time, we would just get them into certain poses and kind of show those, and then get one of those approved, and then we'd know at that point, what direction to take the character or the creature in. Each player race has a unique mount, and those mounts were designed to basically reflect each character. In the case of humans, riding horses makes perfect sense. Gnomes, we wanted to have something lighthearted and something that would reflect their inclination to tinker. And so we have the Mechanostrider, which is a mechanical, ostrich. Night Elves ride tigers, which kind of flows with the whole Priestess of the Moon in Warcraft 3. The Dwarfs ride rams. At one point, they rode boars, and it just didn't quite look right. It was interesting, definitely, but we ultimately came up with the rams. So not only did we have unique mounts per race, but we also have some extremely unique mounts per class. And in the case of the Paladin and the Warhorses, and the Warlocks can summon a Nightmare. So the Nightmare is a little bit different than the typical undead horse that the undead ride, in that it essentially is more of an ethereal, dark stallion with, blazing hooves and blazing eyes, in which case we were able to incorporate some of our spell effects into the models to create that unique look. We had a lot of fun animating the unique individual mounts for each character.
Some of the creatures were particularly challenging, especially the elemental type creatures, whether it be wind, fire, water elemental. These are not very solid. They're made up of different elements that are very difficult to convey in a video game. Using polygons, it's very difficult to create an ethereal kind of look.
In the case of say, a water elemental, if you were to kill it, essentially it just dissipates into nothing. And of course that posed some technical issues with how are we supposed to loot nothing after we've killed it. And so we would go in and say, okay, well, we need something like bracers or something solid. And so of course we would drop bracers. As the creature is fading away, we drop some piece of armor so that a character could see something on the ground and it would sense, okay, I can loot this. There's multiple boss creatures in the World of Warcraft, and they're treated a little bit different than the standard creature. We had some technical limitations on creatures. We weren't to exceed a certain, bone number, bone count, animation count. Those restrictions were pretty much removed with boss creatures, since a lot of the times you're going to be encountering them by themselves and not in a group. A lot of times we're able to use more bones, more animations. You're going to see definitely a level of intensity, higher than the standard creature. You're going to see we definitely spent more time on the boss creatures just because we really wanted them to have a huge impact in the game.
Hi, this is Bill Petrus. I'm the art director on World of Warcraft, and I'm happy to introduce the lead art staff of World of Warcraft.
I'm Kyle Harrison, the lead technical artist.
I'm Brandon Idle, lead character artist.
Justin Tabrat, lead artist.
I'm Kevin Beardsley, the lead animator.
One of the biggest things that we did early on is we really had to look at the Warcraft look, and we really had to figure out, hey guys, what are we actually going to be doing in this project? We did a lot of experiments with different scales of exaggeration. We also had a different style for the textures, and we realized that it wasn't the Warcraft look. It was not there, and we had to modify that look, and what you see today is basically the blood, sweat, and tears of many years of work to try and get that style, and in some ways we actually pushed the style. We really wanted to make our game feel like multiple artists just really lovingly rendered this game out, everywhere from the animations to the modeling to the texturing to the lighting, the exaggerated scales of things, the animations filled with character.
You can just tell by strongly exaggerated poses and animations that we drew from Frazetta and Disney, references that we drew from, really strong references.
With the environmental work, some of the major influences obviously were like N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle, Dean Cornwell, some of the older American landscape artists. We really wanted to capture that atmosphere, that feel in our game where you go from one area to the other and you can feel the heat of the zone. It's interesting when you're working on a project like this, as complicated and as big it is, because you don't really see all the pieces come together at the same time. This particular artist does his job over here, and it takes a while for it to get into the game and to be played. And at some point in development, I don't really remember when, just when all of it started to come together, and we were just really excited to be like, wow, this really is coming together. I don't remember exactly when that was. When was that?
I think it was when Westfall kind of got put together.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. The lighting came together, the textures came together, the player character, one of our first creatures, the Knoll, basically just nailed that Warcraft look and feel, both with texture, model, and animation. I mean, I think that's when it came together.
Westfall was definitely the start of really capturing the look of what the game was going to be.
One thing that I think really sets WoW apart from other games out there is that we really refuse to go down the assembly line process. Every time we approached a new zone or a new area that the player would explore, we wanted them to be completely rewarded in every way whatsoever. So from the lighting to the sky, all the way down to just the little brush and brambles on the ground or the ambient creatures that would be running around that area, we made sure that it was fresh every time. And we came through and meticulously created new art, new even techniques each time we got to a new area.
I think the team was never really happy with just what we were working with. We always were pushing the envelope. We always wanted to just maximize the technology that we had. We made sure that our textures worked twice as hard.
It was really refreshing to have different perspectives from all over the art department. You know, whether a texture artist came in and commented on the animation, or a designer walked in and said, "Oh, I think this would look cooler if it was bigger." It was really an open back and forth communication, which I think, you know, in the long run, it's a very iterative process. It might take a little longer than, say, a different method of doing it, but I think in the end, it works out for the best, and everyone kind of gets their 2 cents in on some stage of the game there.
I was always impressed at just how open each team was in respecting another group or another little development group or an area of development that would come in and say, hey, you know, we noticed that, you know, this maybe was not reaching its full potential, or we felt like maybe we could try this and it would be a little cooler. And people were always very open to at least hear that and sort of get that line of communication going back and forth. So that really helped to build us, I think, more in a very strong direction.
We continually are replacing and upgrading and doing things to the world that we want to change. And so we're going to continue to do that for the next, I don't know how many years.
A lot of times our philosophy seems to start at sort of minimalist. We say, well, we want to keep the art reined in. We don't want to like really eat up any unneeded CPU time trying to render this. So what we do is we kind of create the art at the lowest level we can and try to make it look good at that level. And then we find as a year or two goes by and hardware gets faster on computers, we can then come through and sort of finesse it a little bit, add a few of the things that we maybe skimped over to begin with, and we just make it that much better by kind of refining it.
The iterative process, just going back and making everything polished. And you'll just notice that even before it gets into the game, sometimes there's a dozen drawings for one creature before it gets put in the game. And you know, hopefully we'll be able to show you some of just the rejected ideas and just how much goes into the final one that makes it into the game.
Early on, the concepts that we were having, we were showing the artists that were modeling in texture, and we're like, the Warcraft style is super thick and exaggerated, just huge bulging biceps, everything pushed at the maximum. And that's just kind of the way that we approached it. And originally we had some artists that were like, you want me to make that hand 5 times bigger? Are you sure? We're like, yes. And they were like, I don't know. And we're like, just do it. And then once they started doing, they were realizing like, wow, this is the style. This is what we're looking for.
The animation is very exaggerated in this game, but at the same time, it still has weight and still has a level of realism to it. So, you know, it's still believable.
I think one of the pivotal areas of our art is that it's not so much about detail. It's about form, it's about light, and it's about color. The artists pay more attention to the shape or form of an object or the texture of the surface and how the light plays off of that, and how they can get that across mood-wise with colors.
I totally agree. I think it's the illusion of something rather than creating all the little details. If you can create that illusion where people go, oh wow, that's it, and it's less polys and less texture space, then we've done our job.
Yeah, so in addition, what is the Warcraft style? And we've had to break open all the old books and manuals and look at it, and I can think of some of Sammy, the art director, you know, it's old sketches, or Chris Metzen's, you know, and some of the definitive little pieces, like just the big boots. Like everyone's got these size like 16 shoes in the Warcraft world. The boots are bigger than their thighs and things like that, and just trying to carry it down into the role-playing game perspective, but still trying to maintain that overall look and feel. You know, like everything meshes together, everything flows.
Yeah, even down to the user interface and the icons. I mean, everything just melds together.
The icons in particular, we
thousands of them. I think there are thousands of icons.
Thousands of icons, and not only that, but each one is just so handcrafted. It's just so lovingly painted. It was so amusing just to sit and watch how meticulously they would paint these things and concentrate on the colors and the form, and they're just fun to look at. And that was really part of the design from the art standpoint, was that you're looking at icons a lot in this kind of game, and that really is more than anything what's representing it, unless you're directly using that item in the world. So we knew that they had to be big and colorful, and you really had to just get rewarded just by looking at it.
In the midst of schedules and everything, it's important not to get too bogged down and have fun. Kind of, I think one of the things that defines a Warcraft is it kind of has a sense of humor. It doesn't take itself too seriously. At some points, that's kind of a challenge to infuse into this role-playing game. But we did our best, and I think if you can work in development and just kind of enjoy it and kind of laugh at it, and again, not take it too seriously, just have fun.
I think one of the things that always would bring a smile to your face, even in the darkest days, is the old Shane cube. Whenever there's a model missing a texture or some error, we
have a producer, Shane, who accidentally got his face stuck on a piece of art that represents anything that doesn't display properly in the game. So he's all over the place, actually.
His face shows up in newspapers, articles, and cartoons and everything.
Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3 were very important influences on our game, the World of Warcraft. So once again, the silhouettes, colors, and proportions, we wanted to really mimic a lot of the things that had been done previously, yet pull these out more for a down in the world third person or first person point of view rather than the sort of God mode view of playing overhead in an RTS.
The perspective of the game definitely was a big influence on what we decided to accentuate and how we designed our characters. Just off the top of my head, a funny thing was that when we were originally designing this game, we were thinking about maybe taking it in a different direction, maybe a little darker or different look and feel. But we soon realized that Warcraft had a very established look, and that it would be a big mistake to deviate from that. So a lot of the typical characteristics of the characters' environments, the bright colors and the big silhouettes and shapes, we just stuck with it and just kept going. Carried that through the environments all the way down to the characters and creatures.
Color was very important. I think as anyone plays the game, they'll see that there's a lot of passion for color. With the creatures, we actually found that less was more. Early on, we tried very, very sort of realistic, painting it almost to the point of photorealism, and they were beautiful pieces of art, but once they got into the world, it didn't really come across as simply as the older games did, and we found that the more we kind of scaled it back and went more stylized with the color, we actually would get down to where literally we'd just pick like 2 or 3 basic colors that would be on a creature, and we would kind of use those in sort of over-the-top ways, like some tribal tattoos or some little accent around the waist, or even like a hairstyle would kind of key off of other colors of the body. But we really toned those back and found the more that we kind of locked down colors tightly, the better they worked.
In addition to, nailing the unique look of Warcraft through the colors, we also, had the shapes of the characters to work with. So proportions of the characters we found out were really key ways to distinguish our creatures and our characters from one another. So we tried to maximize the silhouettes of the characters, and, maybe we'd pick out a certain aspect about them that we'd really want to accentuate. One creature had really big claws or a really disproportionate upper torso and a tiny head to accentuate how big his muscles were. You'll notice that the dwarves are really short and stout, and the night elves are really elegant and tall and elongated.
We would see that we had these 2 different races. Maybe they were both really cool, but we would pick up on the fact that, I don't know, these guys are they're kind of looking a lot the same from a distance. And even though we really liked the way one of them maybe was proportioned already, we would go ahead and start trying to alter that to give it some uniqueness over the other one. And generally what we found was that we would end up with something that we liked even more, that was even more exotic or more out there. So it worked out well.
I guess our theme of things that we do is we just push it and keep going too far with it and then go, oh my gosh, that's now just ridiculous looking. And then we just back it off a notch from that. As with, every other aspect in the World of Warcraft, you kind of can divide it right down the middle as the 2 different factions, the Horde and the Alliance. With the races, we have the humans, the Night Elves, the Dwarves, and the Gnomes for the Alliance. And on the Horde, the Orcs, Taurens, Undead, and Trolls. And right off the bat, we just tried to start brainstorming about what we could do to set these races apart from one another. What makes you feel really cool and unique that you're picking this race over all the others? The humans are going to be the one characters that everyone can associate with. They kind of have typical proportions, a little exaggerated, a little muscular, but they're kind of the familiar characters that everyone will recognize on sight.
And Night Elves, once again, still muscular. I mean, it's always our theme. We always kind of go over the top with the muscularity of our characters, but we decided much more of a lanky jungle dweller, someone who would be kind of running through this forest and grappling logs, leaping over them, that kind of thing. Very, very athletic, very primal, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you'll even see it all in the intro cinematic for the game, too. You'll see we kind of tried to capture these races in their environments, kind of, demonstrating what they'll do in their natural habitat. The dwarves are pretty established now too. They're kind of just the short, squat, muscular, cave-dwelling guys. Do a lot of mining and hunting and real rustic characters, real gruff, kind of tromping around in the snow. And so we just kept those themes with them as well. Big bushy beards, a lot of bright primary colors for their beards are bright red, bright orange. We also have, grizzly, gray and white and black. And as we were doing this too, we found out like hair color was super key with defining each race as well. So certain hair colors are only available to these races and not to others. we didn't want to let the player necessarily choose any color for anything.
The gnomes kind of came in late into the game. We had gnomes come in with, this sort of a need to add, we felt one more race per Alliance horde. So the gnomes filled in on the Alliance side, and we have these kind of short, squat little comical characters that have sort of outrageous hairstyles. We felt with their small size, probably the best thing that we could do was to really over-exaggerate their head, and not only that, but what you always see on top of it, their hair. We had a lot of fun with some crazy beard, mustache combinations to really start defining the gnome male in particular. The artists working on that would draw from some of the European and North American beard contests and
I
mustache
remember seeing
contests. Just completely like outlandish stuff, but it was a lot of fun and people would just get a kick out of it. So he implemented a lot of those just for flavor. With the female, we went with a lot of just interesting like pom-poms and braided hairs that would just kind of wind well up off of the head and almost create this sort of tower effect. It's really comical, but I think in the long run it really works because it's the one element that you're going to pick up on them as you're running around in the world.
I don't necessarily always think about it, but the hair creates such an interesting silhouette on the character. It's a thing that it's on right on the top, and it's a really good element to take advantage of to really help distinguish one race from the other. So we definitely tried to push it with the gnomes. On the opposite side of the spectrum from the Alliance, we have the Horde, and that's the Orcs, the Tauren, the Undead, and the Troll races. Once again, the Orcs were already designed from Warcraft 1, 2, and 3. We initially tried to pioneer some different looks and feels for them, but with a lot of the design on this game, we just felt falling back on what was already established was the best route. They already looked just amazing and really cool, and so we stuck with what we were familiar with. They're just big, oversized, muscle-bearing, bodybuilding looking guys with big brutish faces. In addition to the orcs, there's the Tauren, and they're just the giant minotaur race, even bigger than the orcs with the big bull heads. They got the great horns and the big manes and the really super top heavy physiques that help distinguish them out from the other characters. It's really cool to see these characters all lined up, because from a distance you can always pick out who's the gnome, who's the dwarf, who's the Tauren. And with them, they were already established as well from Warcraft series, so we just kind of went with what was already there. Doing the females again was a challenge, and now we kind of have this docile cow female character for them,
Yeah, we really reined her in after a while. I mean, it almost became sort of a joke with our fans that it couldn't get much uglier than the Tauren female. So as much as we didn't want to pull back our artistic license, we decided to go ahead and kind of rein them in and give them something unique to the male. We still obviously wanted to make them feel like an upright bovine, if you will, but softer tones, shorter snouts, the mouth not being so long and brutish, kind of ditching the overhanging teeth elements and really toning her horns back so that she got sort of a softer element to her, more upright as well. So she got much more mid-heavy but slender at the same time, whereas the male really had that huge upper body bulk going on.
The third race for the Horde was the Undead, and I don't think there were any other races in other online games where you were able to play Undead race, so we were really excited about that. Initially, we went through probably a dozen different design concepts for what they would do and how they would evolve while you play them, and whether you would turn more into an ethereal type of creature or more of a Death Knight type of thing. But in the end, we just went with a character that you would be able to keep and retain throughout the course of your experience playing the game. So, we have a bunch of really cool different wacky concepts for these creatures. There's dozens and dozens of drawings of them that we tried out different things, different proportions, and eventually we got this kind of hybrid undead but kind of familiar looking character that's in the game.
We had gone the full gamut from sort of just a thin, pale, emaciated human, which very obvious from the get-go that just really wasn't exciting us, to these just hulking, heaping mounds of decaying flesh, with the evil eyes. And we're like, well, that's certainly out there, but it's probably almost more bestial than what we want a player character to be. I firmly believe that it's important that there's some relatability to the character that you're playing, that there's still got to be some more down-to-earth element to them, even if they have like some very outrageous elements. So we kind of realized we were going to have to find that sweet spot in the middle. What we ended up really opting to was trying to give them sort of a standard physique, but really play off of some decaying elements where they had some cool shapes and silhouettes defined from like a midsection kind of being missing, or mid part of their leg or arms missing, and then also with some really cool like fun hairstyles and little bone protrusions that would happen across their anatomy. We just had to make the other elements we had, such as clothing and things, kind of work around those. The trolls were added in as a counterpart to the gnomes, and we really had wanted to have trolls in the game. We really, wanted to see them alongside of the other Horde members because they're another great tribal, shamanistic kind of thing, so they fit in really well with the other races. We had the same challenges that we had with some of the other races, especially in regards to the females. We've continually kind of gone round and round trying some different elements with the females, always trying to keep them tall and lanky, but we've gone, round and round with different iterations of her face and her posture, trying to find something that still feels very much troll, but is still appealing to a broad range of players. And one thing that we had learned from some of the other races was that it was actually important that we do certain things with the geometry so that it allowed us to have both attractive and non-attractive facial textures. And that was a quick way for us to be able to choose from the artist side just how much we would allow them to have, whether a player wanted to have something that was a little more scary and frightening and felt, truly monstrous, or if they wanted to be a more attractive character that maybe would be a little more socially acceptable in the game.
Aside from all the player characters that you get to play as in the game, the other huge element to populating the world was all the monsters and creatures and bad guys and mobs and whatever you want to call them, the stuff you're hunting around in the world that you're interacting with. Creating monsters is just an ongoing process. It never seems like there's really enough. Anything from the little ambient squirrels that are running around in the world to the deers that are walking around to the other monsters, the gnolls or the spiders you're hunting, all the way up to the big epic dragons and then the crazy boss monsters you're fighting. I think currently in the game we have like over 500 unique creatures. And with each creature, we have color variations. So with all the color variations that we have to choose from with these characters, there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them throughout the world. And hopefully as you're adventuring and stuff, you're finding new ones and you're just discovering all kinds of cool stuff in the game.
We had a lot of established creatures that came from the Warcraft universe, and particularly Warcraft 3, where suddenly creeps were being introduced, and that gave us more to pull from. We had gnolls and kobolds and all these cool little like secondary creatures that were in the world, and that very quickly became something we wanted to key off of. In fact, probably the gnolls and kobolds were some of our early tests where we really kind of hit where we were going with the style of the creatures, about how much detail that the artist would paint in, or the kinds of color palettes that would be used.
When we were able to recreate some of those key creatures, the gnoll or the kobold, spiders and other creatures like that, based off of concepts from Warcraft 3 and Warcraft 2, that really hit home for us, and we kind of knew the direction we were facing and where to keep going. So there's a lot of familiar creatures in the game. You're going to have ogres and centaurs, all kinds of stuff that is already around from the previous Warcraft games. The overarching challenge of doing this, the online role-playing game, was that it was a different perspective on a familiar franchise. So now we were having to, create these characters in a much higher resolution. You could see them from all angles, all around, and you were up close and in the face against all these monsters. So, it definitely took us a while to get on our feet and run with it, and to learn just how much detail was enough or how much was just too much, and we didn't need to do that because we knew we had to do hundreds of them. So we needed to find that healthy balance, and so I think we did. At a glance, I think all the characters really seem to they feel like they're in the same world. All the different artists really got the similar style. Halfway in the middle, towards the end of the project, you didn't know who made what. They just all fit. They all fit with each other.
We did a lot of sort of creative reuse on the models. As our library grew, we could take more and more elements that were sort of already constructed for another creature or character, and we would realize that was a perfect element for something new that we were doing, that we could at least reuse that. And by the time we were done, we had made sure from the artistic standpoint that it really wasn't recognizable. You didn't just feel like it was some limb slapped on from another model, but it definitely really pushed our pipeline and timeline. We could get things done much more quickly and efficiently, and it would stay at a very high quality because we could spend the time to build any one element once, like a pair of wings for a dragon or something like that, and that could be used again and again on other creatures so that it really wasn't recognizable anymore.
With a lot of our creatures, we start with a basic concept sketch, just a drawing. Sometimes it's a doodle on a napkin. Sometimes it's a really nice high-resolution painting, on the computer. More times than not, there'll be dozens of drawings for the same one creature, especially early on in the project where we're really trying to, brainstorm everything in the game. We don't want to shut any idea down necessarily. And so many people, I can say I think almost all the artists on our team can concept. Everyone's always drawing, coming up with cool ideas. We definitely have people that specialize in it, but it's safe to say that, everyone's always contributing in the idea phase of designing the creatures, whether it's a established Warcraft creature or something new that we have to create to fill a new environment.
Once we had these really beautiful concepts that different people had submitted, we kind of would sift through them and find the elements that were the strongest and sort of like what the team agreed on. So we'd take those elements, maybe we'd even re-concept one last drawing of it to make sure that we liked all those elements together, and then that would get passed on to art director for approval. Once that was done, it was passed off to our meshers, and the meshers simply build the geometry that creates the 3D sculpture in the game. So after the meshing is completed on the model, it's passed on to the texture artist. This can be the same person or another person. We're pretty flexible here on the art team, and a lot of guys can do a lot of different things. So once that's passed on or ready for that next phase, the textures are applied, and the textures are simply a painting that is wrapped onto the model that creates the colors and the illusion of details and depth on the given creature or character.
So once the creatures have been modeled and textured and eventually animated, they're placed in the world, and they place them in these little groups in all the different environments, and they take a lot of care into how they place them to make them look like they're inhabiting their surrounding areas, and that they're doing different things on their own, roaming around, patrolling, fighting all the different creatures. It's a process that requires a lot of disciplines, all the way from the concept drawing to the actual creation on the computer to the designers that put it in the game, and eventually you're fighting it and getting the cool stuff that it has to drop off.
The pinnacle of our creature development and also what the player will experience in the game was obviously boss creatures, and these we would just really go all out on. The schedule would suddenly relax a little, and the artist would have more time to work on them, and more polys could be spent, more texture resolution could be spent, so these were larger and more detailed, crisper, to hold up to the sizes that they were going to be in the game, because they could be just magnificent sizes in some of these dungeons. I don't want to give a lot of some of the fun stuff you'll find in the game away, but obviously some of the staples of fantasy like dragons and giant, like aquatic boss monsters that you could fight. You'll find these all throughout the world, and the artists really look forward to being able to work on these, because it was sort of the testing of everything that you had learned building some of our smaller and more staple creatures that are obviously just as important. But these were the time when you really got to just go all out and use probably every skill set and every tool that you had figured out on the way to creating these things.
We tried to divvy them up amongst all the different character artists, and so hopefully everyone got to do one or work on some element of one, because they were just really fun to do. They were, like Brandon was saying, you get to use everything that you learned, and it was always a real charge to see that finally walking around in the game, and actually players like running in fear from these 20-foot creatures just storming around, and it's a real kick. And when you watch players reacting to the different creatures and the art that you help produce, it's really invigorating. It's really cool to see that, so kind of what keeps you going.
Dungeons and architecture was an amazing area to work with. With the Warcraft world, you were never really, in a lot of the Blizzard games, you never really got to enter the world. You were never able to go inside of the city and adventure within the tavern. And it was exciting to work with the team and actually entering the world, opening that door to that crypt and going into that temple and seeing this whole new world in there. And we had a lot of freedom involved in that, and a lot of the artists got to really use their imaginations and pull from things that didn't exist before, and were able to mesh that into the world. And it was really exciting to see this whole other world, part of Warcraft that people haven't seen before, and that was truly amazing to see.
It was really exciting to see each city come online. I think everyone was really excited to see, what the next city is going to look like, because they're all so different. The Dead Mines really set the bar for the rest of the dungeons and the the interiors.
It's not just an area you just go in now and kill some stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of little interactive elements to it, almost like stories unfold as you dig deeper into it. All of a sudden, these miners look a little weirder than you were suspecting, and all. I don't want to give it away or anything, but when you get to the bottom and you get to the final boss or whatever, I mean, it's just its own little epic journey that who knows how many hours it'll take you to get through.
We've never done this before. This is a totally new area for Blizzard. I know this type of game is too, but I just wanted to really say that artists that worked on this particular area, the dungeons and the cities, just did an amazing job. And early on, they went through a lot of trials and things like that, and they really came through. They really did a great job, and we really appreciate it.
We had so much Warcraft history to draw from, and so again, this was our first opportunity to translate something from the real-time strategy game to the role-playing game. So something as simple as the blacksmith structure or the human farm. Instead of the top-down little piece of art that you're used to seeing, we had to design it all, the building, the structures, what the signs outside of it look like, how someone can tell that they're in front of a blacksmith, placement of anvils and tools, and the layout of the interior of the building, what's functional. What they were able to do and the illusion they were able to create with just the flat walls and just what they were able to paint and the colors and the lighting and maximizing their assets. There probably wasn't a day that people, saw the work that they were doing and just couldn't believe that they were getting it to look like that in our engine.
That team actually pushed the rest of the art staff too. The dungeon team really just did some amazing work, and the rest of the team would see that and push to be at that level. And I remember some of the first stuff that came through that group. It was stunning. I was like, wow, that is the Warcraft style. I mean, they nailed it. It was a great job.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
The artists really push each other, to do better, and everyone thrives off that and thrives off each other.
There's a lot of history there. There is a lot of depth, and the team worked very closely with Chris Metzen and other people in the company to make sure that these elements are tried and true, and they actually took those ideas and ran with them, and they've done just an amazing job. They're very, very particular about, gameplay. It was pretty exciting to see that.
I'd say early on with our dungeons too, it was difficult to get that organic look. We tried a number of different programs early on, different methods of building, and ultimately we got it, but it was definitely a challenge. We spent some time trying to determine what the size of the city was going to be. I mean, we didn't know how big a city should be. I mean, are people going to get lost? What's a good size? What feels right without getting lost but doesn't feel too small?
And it's still epic and exciting to venture into and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, they ended up putting dungeons and little instance areas where people would actually have to go to a city to fight and stuff like that. So, they have more of a function than just this is where you go to sell your items or buy your goods.
In my mind, I can look at some of the dungeons that I'm just thinking about right now, and I'm just clearly just the definitive look they have for the Night Elves is so different than the humans. Just the lighting values and the color schemes are different, and how more organic the Night Elves are than the humans. And it's like, yeah, you can relate more to the humans, but when you see that orc, city of Orgrimmar, it's just like you just want to explore that.
If you go into Stormwind, the opening gate is huge and oversized. You cross the bridge; it's lined with all the heroes. There were concepts for it, and then it was built and put in the game, and tried to just hit you over the head. Make it memorable, make the silhouette of the parapets and the towers, and really striking and resemble the race.
I think another big thing too is everyone has their favorite city. Whether it's the Undercity or Stormwind or Ironforge or Orgrimmar or Darnassus. We want all the cities to be on the same level. Obviously we wanted Ironforge to be super memorable, and we wanted Darnassus to be exactly that too. And it was kind of funny to see how people were like, they would rank all the cities, and then this one would move up a couple rankings, and it's nice to see that all the cities really just turn out fantastic. I mean,
And we have Thunder Bluff too.
I forgot about Thunder Bluff. Yeah.
Massive sort of mesa structure,
Actually,
which is just beautiful.
Exactly. I mean, just when you think dungeon is this dark hole in the ground, you go to a city like Thunder Bluff, and it just blows you away, because it's just not what you expect. I mean, you don't expect to see giant windmills and these just amazing looking architecture, these teepees, and it's just
Totems and
big. Yeah, it's really a treat to see. I know a lot of time in development, you work on a project like this for a long time and you're so close to it, you don't really appreciate it as much because you're just so close to it. But with this project, it's like every once in a while you see something that just really inspires you, and the team really worked hard, and some of this stuff is just so memorable.
I think it was kind of neat too, because each city would set the bar a little bit more. Ironforge would get created and they would say, wow, that's amazing. I think we should go back and revisit Darnassus now. And then we'd spend weeks on redoing Darnassus or parts of it, and then they would come back and go, you know what, Ogremar could really use some touching up now. And it was constantly, even, we're getting close to shipping or whatever, and we're still revisiting the cities. We're still constantly just keep outdoing each other. And so it's this great cycle in the end. It's just going to, make for more fantastic environment.
I think that's true for the whole game.
Absolutely,
This is a game of iteration. Everything has been touched and retouched again and again to make it better and better.
This world has always been sort of divided by the Alliance and the Horde. You've always had the orcs and the humans clashing together, and now, as the franchise grows, we have more and more races that are becoming involved with the conflict and taking sides. So we really wanted to get across that this world, the world itself, felt divided, that within the Alliance lands, you got a lot more of sort of a lush, beautiful forest and valleys, fields, jungles. It's very colorful and beautiful most of the time. You'll find this very inviting and warm. As opposed to that, you'll run through the Horde lands and you'll find that there's this very desolate theme of sand and rock and just brushy barrens, and they're even named as such. You have the Thousand Needles and
The
Barrens, and we even to the names themselves, we really push sort of that flavor. It's just a very overall theme. I think anyone's really going to pick up on that as soon as they decide to play Alliance or Horde. They're going to see a very big contrast.
I think of the Alliance, you think of lush and green. You think of the Horde and orcs, you think of dusty red and orange, and that's to make each region of the world just exceptionally iconic.
With the environment design for World of Warcraft, we really wanted the environments to have a really handcrafted feel. We wanted the terrain to really have that feel that it was created, by hand. We really wanted to make sure that all the little details were embellished to the point, the viewer could tell that it just wasn't computer generated. For example, like the palettes and the detail in the environment, we really wanted to make sure that the viewer got rewarded with a lot of detail and things like that.
So we treated them just as key as the characters, as the monsters, and everything else.
Absolutely.
There's not any one element of our game that stands out too far above the rest. Is that we treated the environments, the tile sets, everything just as important as a character, as a weapon. Everything received that equal amount of just real handcrafted treatment.
A lot of the artists, too, actually were hiking fanatics, and we have some people that are really outdoors type artists, and they really bring that to the table. They they talk about like North Carolina or Pennsylvania, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out just visually what's the most interesting angles to approach things.
We didn't just isolate out terrain and just think of a lot of high-res textures or high-res geometry for the terrain. We realized that it was just as crucial that the terrain marry with lighting, with the fog. All of these elements were very important to pull together. And, just in layman's terms, we just pulled a lot of old school tricks to try to get across a lot more than what we're really doing technically, and keep all this under wraps where people could still afford to enjoy a nice frame rate and a beautiful vista all at the same time. We had a lot of beautiful color studies, which you'll see as we're talking about this.
The game is about a game of trees. You have to have good trees in these kind of games. You stare at the terrain all the time, and we had some of the artists working on some of the trees. You'll notice that we have a really wide range of design for trees. We spent many years looking at the trees and studying them, and they're really like the glue that holds everything together.
We were working on one of our earlier zones, and we concepted tree after tree after tree and built tree after tree after tree. And I remember laughing when I realized that we probably had about 50 iterations of this one tree that we just kept refining and trying to get it, as reasonable as possible as far as, poly counts and texture counts. And We went probably through weeks of collective testing on some of those trees over and over again, and then once we had those, it was sort of a framework for the ones to follow.
I was just going to say that, yeah, when we got the color studies going, I felt like that was a really key point in development for the environments. Once we started doing that, it impacted us, and it took us a while to ramp up. But the initial prep work it took to get these environments, it really paid off in the end. It just, everything married together so much better.
Yeah.
Our team of environmental artists spent a lot of time developing their techniques on the terrain itself, learning what types of patterns look best when you're running through the game. We were really particular about hills and rises and visibility. Initially, we made almost too many hills where, for gameplay reasons, it was harder to see the spawns and things like that. So in addition to just making a beautiful looking scene, we had to work closely with game design. We a lot of times had to compromise on a lot of things to make sure that gameplay was still there.
We wouldn't just do one of them for a zone, we'd also do one for different times of day. So we'd have one that was drawn to illustrate what the daytime light settings would be. We would do some for the evening time settings. We found that the sunrise and sunset were some of the most fun values to work with and offered like some of the best lighting.
We actually enjoyed them so much. A lot of times we would purposely kind of let the keyframing be very loose. Mornings and evenings actually bleed in very heavily to noon and to midnight, so that you got to enjoy some of that dusty sort of feel a lot more of the day, because it was just more dramatic and just pretty. It was
Basically,
really
the sunset lasts for like 8 hours in our game or something like that. Just because it looks so cool, it just runs all day.
We wanted to make sure the palettes of the zone reflected somewhat in the race, very subtly. For example, the undead area of Tirisfal Glades, we wanted to kind of keep it cool colors, muted.
Yeah.
For the night elf areas in Teldrassil, we wanted to infuse some of that color back in there, and we were careful to keep the palette, I don't know, maybe 2 colors, trying to keep it simple as possible.
If you run around like sort of in the undead starting area, you can kind of check out the little vegetation growing on the ground, and even those themes of the undead are there just in the vegetation, just for fun little flavor. Vines crawling up and choking out these purple flowers and things. So even down to that degree, the art team kind of paid attention to the details.
They definitely took advantage of every little area. I think some of the grasses have cobwebs, infused in it a little bit. And hopefully like a crate or a barrel in the undead starting area, it's going to look and have its own look and feel compared to a crate or a barrel in the human starting area. And everything from the pallets to, the wood having more cracks and broken nails and knife scratches in it or whatever. They definitely took it. All the artists definitely took advantage. If they got to paint a texture for it, they definitely used every pixel to represent the environment that this prop was going to be set into. So,
I know, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that we strive for, too, is just the uniqueness of what we want to do. We want to make sure that the zones look as good as possible, as far as, like, if you were to take a screenshot of our game and you see it in a magazine, it looks different. It has a certain look to it that you're not going to find easily. Working on a game of this scope and detail really pushed the art staff to really just think about what actually we're doing. It's so much different than the usual type of games we're used to making, that you're creating an entire world. You're creating the atmosphere and lighting and terrain and the look and feel. And sometimes it's really interesting. You'll be working on a piece of environment and you'll get stuck, and then you'll drive home and see the sunset or see some kind of imagery that inspires you. So, and then you go back to work the next day and you're like, oh, I saw this, the sunset yesterday, and it totally changed what we should do.
Yeah, we had lots of just elements to work with in the editor for creating the world. We had the directional lighting, the ambient lighting, the sun color, the moon color, fog color, and all the gradations of colors in the sky. And I know Brandon did most of that stuff for so many of the zones, the watercolor, cloud color. And so we just take our time and put these together in the right order, playing off each other, the right colors, the right settings to create just that unified look and feel.
Overall, we really wanted to have the environments have that old Maxfield Parish or that NC Wyeth, that warm feel, that handcrafted feel. I know we say that a lot, but we really wanted to have that look. And even in the trees, if you look at the trees, it's very hand painted, all the textures, and we were careful how things blend together, how trees would blend into the environment. We were constantly racking our brains about the tile set, what was too busy. Initially a lot of the roads were too busy and too dark, and we had to simplify those. And it was definitely a learning process, for everyone. But kudos to the team, though.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Chris Metzen. I'm the Vice President of Creative Development for Blizzard and the lead world designer for the series for the past, 9 years or so, or ever since Warcraft 2. Wanted to talk a bit today about kind of the story of Warcraft and how the world unfolded, specifically from the series RTS roots and up through the creation and development of certainly World of Warcraft. And also kind of how it's translated to the D&D game series that we've been creating with White Wolf Publishing, some of the novels we've had a chance to put out. Warcraft's become kind of a big fantasy juggernaut, strangely enough, after all these years. And it's kind of interesting how it has unfolded. Essentially Warcraft is, if you figure that most modern fantasy is kind of based off of, Lord of the Rings or, Tolkien's work, he kind of had amalgamated a lot of fantasy ideas, elves and magic weapons and wizards and huge epic scope histories, weaving together. Warcraft's essentially kind of third or fourth generation fantasy, which is kind of crazy these days, where you have kind of a lot of video game fantasy universes becoming the new school kind of settings. You have a lot of interactive games kind of taking place in these worlds that are, essentially phantoms of Tolkien's vision back in the day. Warcraft's certainly part of that tradition, elves and dwarves and dragons and such. One of the things we always thought was a good idea is holding on to the more traditional fantasy archetypes, because that's what most people kind of glom onto. It's that familiarity of dwarves and elves and magic rings and things that kind of define what fantasy is. We found that, people like that. People are really drawn to that. It's a strength of the genre, whether in video games or just, fiction. If you're reading a novel, it's the familiarity that really sings to people over and over. But we've always liked the idea of kind of spinning those archetypes on their head. What happens when elves go crazy as a race? What happens when dark elves suddenly are heroic and noble? What happens when orcs, that are typically, mindless and brutal? What happens when they're kind of given some nobility? And we can kind of begin to identify with these races and cultures kind of beyond that surface kit that we've been sold all these years through various products and media. So it's been pretty crazy kind of developing the World of Warcraft and trying to change it up a bit, keep it familiar enough to people who are interested in fantasy, but kind of shake it up and drive it boldly forward to those who kind of want a little more out of their gaming experience, which is, certainly our core role. It's kind of been a strange process, developing the kind of geography of the World of Warcraft as the storyline is unfolded. When you're developing RTS games, there really isn't a hard parameter on how the world unfolds, right? You just kind of need maps to make up and, kingdoms to destroy. It's a very planar design. You just kind of draw 2D on a page, what a landmass that looks interesting and try and dot it with interesting stuff. I imagine a lot of RTS games are kind of designed that way, just kind of in a very planar sense. It started to get interesting, when we started talking about World of Warcraft and expanding this place and these locales to be more 3D, to be more, immersive, places that you'd actually run around in, instead of just being RTS maps and very planar. How does it begin to translate to an immersive world experience? It was kind of weird, shifting gears from the RTS mindset to the RPG mindset. We kind of always knew, since Warcraft 2, we always knew that, as we expanded, in Warcraft 1, we had the kingdom of Stormwind and the land of Azeroth. And it was the conflict of that game was pretty much contained within that place. The orcs come through the swamps of Sorrow and, through Elwyn Forest and attack Stormwind. The scope of that conflict was pretty small. As we started talking about Warcraft 2 and the idea of expanding the two armies, certainly we had the orcs and the humans at that point. With Warcraft 2, we wanted to expand more races into those groups, so the human group became the alliance, with elves and dwarves and gnomes. Reciprocally, the orc group expanded to include forest trolls and ogres and death knights and all sorts of good creepy guys. But in doing so, For our world context, we wanted to show where these creatures came from, and have a greater sense of ecology and a greater sense of world. So it became necessary to create, Cosmodon, or the area the dwarves came from, or Lordaeron, and ultimately Quel'Thalas, where the secondary human kingdoms and elves came from specifically. So a lot of the design decisions with the two armies and kind of expanding them predicated building the world and building it out further. As Warcraft 2 completed, and we created Draenor, for the Warcraft 2 expansion set, Draenor being the place where the orcs came from, it became clear that in the core world of Azeroth we would need more continents, and wouldn't it be interesting to imagine more ancient realms, that had never heard of orcs and humans, where this conflict might spill over, and thus drudge up, kind of new mysteries and a new mythological cycle for the setting. Thus, we had been talking about creating Kalimdor, this ancient land of the Night Elves. We kind of really warmed to the idea quickly of Dark Elves in this context being the good guys and being kind of the eldest race, the keepers of ancient mystery. So it was kind of interesting to talk about Kalimdor and these dark primordial forest lands and the barrens in the middle, lands that were once lush but kind of destroyed by some kind of apocalypse. It was interesting to imagine Kalimdor having been affected by some huge explosion. Again, it's probably a fantasy archetype, to have your world shattered in some great way. I mean, I've seen it in 100 different stories and 100 different themes. But that got us thinking, game design-wise, we were in more recent years talking about, Warcraft 3, let's talk about what that would be. Are we still just talking two armies? Are we talking expanding that? In our conversations, certainly we wound up with the undead and night elves, but at one point we were definitely considering the Burning Legion to be a race. And a lot of our discussions about the Burning Legion stemmed from, that demons are cool and would have been a neat army set, but kind of from, the story context of the night elves and Kalimdor and their shattered land. And was there more backstory with them and the demons, and was there a greater conflict in the world that kind of predicated the story that we were seeing unfold in the games, that we had published up to that point, War 1, War 2. And we definitely wanted War 3 to kind of encompass all these elements, the Night Elves reawakening, visiting Kalimdor. We wanted the newer races like orcs and humans to kind of be thrown into this ancient conflict and see this ancient land and really have the events of the past kind of come full circle with the resolution of that game. So a lot of times it's the game design and the kind of loose story threads that wind up predicating, what we build, and the game experience that we tailor to it. There's always been a drive that we have had to build a lot of detail into our world and build a lot of backstory into our settings. Specifically, when creating strategy games, it's just difficult to tell a story in that context. You're commanding units and it's real time, and the battlefields, often look very similar. It's hard to get a sense of context or, a sense of story progression. The theory was that, if you have a rich backstory and you have it play out to any degree in the RTS context, that it helps to be immersive and it helps players to kind of get your world and, get this setting, and it makes it special. It makes it stand out against the pack. And we've seen many, many RTS games over the years. And, one of the things that potentially made Warcraft stand out past the gameplay was just the character of the setting and the fact that it was kind of deep, and had and just had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of characters, a lot of intrigue, a lot of history. It kind of gives it its own identity, really. So as we looked to translating all of that to World of Warcraft specifically, it was a little daunting, but it was a great deal of fun. Looking back on the world we had built up to that point. So it was a really cool process of kind of extrapolating, from maps in 8-year-old game manuals and trying to kind of draw them out and really flesh these lands out and these histories out and these cultures. Proved to be a pretty big task, but a fun one. At this point in time, as we're looking at the home stretch on our shipping product for a while, it's crazy how this world has gone from, kind of this very thin idea, thin wallpapering on an RTS series, and it's really blown into just this juggernaut of context and flavor and atmosphere that's defined by 40 artists and programmers and really creative designers. There's just so many heads involved in this thing and kind of creating the vision of this in the world. It's really been crazy to kind of watch this thing grow, kind of take on its own life. It's at the end of the day, I mean, of course I'm very biased, but it's just a cool world. You know, who would have thought 9 years ago, Warcraft 1, that it would have rolled this way, you know? I mean, attributed to certainly game design and a lot of passion, a lot of commitment, a lot of hard work. But it's very rewarding to have seen this world, come off the way it has, and to have been a part of how it's kind of been shaped. You know, when we're talking about making a massively multiplayer game, you know, certainly game design comes first, and we wanted the classes to be fun and, you know, have it be a place that you would just have a blast exploring and leveling up and doing, you know, whatever you do in an RPG. But the trick to WoW is that we identified early on is that we wanted to have the quest content be kind of a staple of your experience, and to throw as much story and context at you as possible. Maybe not to the point where you're being drowned in context and, well, I don't remember who this guy is, or, you know, sometimes it can be distracting, the story content, but we wanted enough there that it really felt like you were in an authentic fantasy setting, and that the things you did mattered overall, that you'd be able to meet characters and NPCs from past games, or, you know, like notable characters from history, guys like Thrall and Jaina Proudmoore, and, you know, villains like Kel'Thuzad and the Lich King, things like that, so that you'd really get a sense that, you know, we were taking the process of building a world seriously, and it wasn't just churned out, and that it had a strong sense of continuity. And we've always tried to do that with our ancillary products like the D&D line and our novels. You know, we're kind of painstakingly anal about making sure that all the details add up, that the continuity is, you know, held to be sacred, you know, so that no matter in what medium you're experiencing Warcraft, it all feels like a contiguous experience. Hope you really enjoy WoW. Hope that, you know, some of this story and history comes off and that we've done our job well and you feel like you're a part of it. Better yet, you feel like, you know, you're at the heart of it, would even be better. So once again, thanks for listening and have a good one. Bye-bye.
With regards to weapons and armor, we had many of the same challenges as the rest of the art production. It was very important that we hit on a lot of the same philosophies that we did with creatures or environments, architecture, which is some of the oversizing of items and colors and exaggeration and things like that.
Specific challenges I think we had with doing the items and the weapons in the game was like the progression of coolness factor from an item you get at level 1 to an item you get at level 60. We wanted to make sure to reward the player when they're playing, and so even at level 1, we want them to feel epic and cool. And at level 60, you know, we still want, you know, the same wow factor. It was always a challenge to make sure that the low-level items in the game were still rewarding and cool looking. So we tried to come up with a visual progression of what people can expect to receive in the game.
Early on, they were probably a little too dry, a little too toned down, and we realized not too far into production that we needed to kind of not only start beefing them up and exaggerating them, but also playing around with some little effects and things we could do to make the weapons really feel sharp, but without utilizing a whole lot of technology.
I think towards the end of production, we pretty much abandoned making low-level, average-looking equipment in the game and started to front-load your play experience with just exciting weapons as much as we could and challenge ourselves to come up with even more interesting, exciting, shimmery, glowy, enticing loot or weapons and items, you know, for the higher levels in the game.
In fact, with our spell team, those guys actually came in more towards the latter end with weapons and really helped us find even that sort of next increment where really uber items could not only be beautiful and really ornate with texture and environment maps, but we could even push them further with actually adding some spell attributes along with them so that you'd maybe get this flame sort of righteousness and you would kind of get these cool fiery effects coming off of it. And that was really yet another progression that really helped us at the end, just kind of pull those way over the top.
After that, everyone just got excited again about seeing glows and fireballs and dripping poisons and ice spells and things just kind of emanating out of the weapon. It's just that next level of progression to help incentivize people to keep playing the game and look for stuff in the game. In addition to the items and the weapons that you're questing for in the game, there's all kinds of armor, helmets and shoulder pads and chest plates and boots, all kinds of stuff. So, you know, some of the same rules that we had for designing the weapons all apply to the armor, you know, and there's a wealth of Warcraft history and mythos and already established look and feel. So we basically just eventually just decided just to pull from what we already had. We did a lot of initial designing up front as well, but there was no shortage of pre-existing art and design concept work to pull from.
Yeah, I know. I remember when we decided just to go ahead and pretty straightforward, just copy the old orc battle harness kind of outfit straight out of War II, and that really struck a chord with the entire team, because now suddenly we had these higher poly detail characters where you're looking at them in first person, but no one had really gotten the sense that this thing was Warcraft yet. And so seeing one of these orcs kind of pacing around with a horned fur-rimmed helmet and this battle harness and, fur leggings, I mean, it really kind of got everybody geeked up, because now they felt like they were really down in this world, in this Warcraft universe, and just kind of getting to experience it. And really, now I'm really actually seeing an orc up close from Warcraft, not just any orc from any game. That gave us sort of a hook where then we felt once we had nailed those down, we could kind of continue on and actually evolve those further and actually start to create our own style from those. It was definitely a positive mark in outfit creation.
All of our modelers and texture artists all do concepts, and so we just let them all at it and just see what people could come up with. Something as simple as just the boots in the game of just different chess pieces and a lot of stuff floating around to pull from.
Yeah, and that was where we needed to decide exactly how we were going to organize these, because we knew we had the Horde Alliance thing, but we didn't know specifically just how far we should break it down. We have quite a few races on each side, and sometimes those share a lot of themes with each other, and sometimes they don't, because you have the difference in a night elf and a human, and there was a great dichotomy. Whereas the night elves almost fit more visually with, say, a horde, we needed to actually give them some of their own flavor. But in the long run, what the biggest distinction was Horde and Alliance, and that as long as we covered the bases for each race, really they just needed to kind of fall into those two categories.
In addition, everything's broken down into cloth, leather, mail, and plate, and then there's robes and stuff. As we got further down development, we started accumulating all these outfits and trying to keep them organized in a way that all the different artists could reference them and see where we were deficient. Oh, we need more plate mail armor. Oh, we have too much cloth armor. And so we just started to organize them in a spreadsheet, and with the naming conventions and with the level of progression, you can look down the spreadsheet and see, oh, okay, here's like the low level intermediate stuff, higher level stuff. Up to the really exciting stuff.
We didn't realize how much that was going to help us, because we really had started doing it for the designers mostly. So as they would take the art that we would create, we knew that they needed a way that they could see an entire outfit that we had intended as a whole, whether or not you would find it as such in the game.
Right.
But what it ended up doing was actually feeding back to us as well, because now we had this very big visual right in front of our face, and we started realizing, oh, hey, maybe some of these leathers are all kind of looking the same, or that, from a distance we're not really getting a lot of contrast between them. So it really helped push us to go further with the outfits, and really we could see that progression, and we can say, oh, okay, now maybe we mix these two up, or we need 3 more at the end of this string, so that we really got a full kit that a player would get in a particular area or as a particular Alliance or Horde member.
In addition, we also organized all the weapons on spreadsheets as well, and it showed us the progression of the first level weapons all the way to the higher level equipment. And we had one-handed versions, two-handed versions, and there's all kinds of weapons in the game. Swords and shields and hammers and maces and knives and thrown weapons, and it was just so many different things to keep organized that we're just trying to stay on top of it all. I think organization was like one of the big things we learned on this project, is that I don't think you can be too organized with trying to keep track of it, especially if multiple people are working on it. I think in the end it paid off. I've been watching people play the game with these guild raids with dozens and dozens of people, and I never see 2 people that look exactly the same dressed up running around, so that's a big relief.
With World of Warcraft, we were really trying to look at other massively multiplayer online RPGs and try to identify what were the elements of those games that were fun. And as we went through it, we would find that people really enjoyed the aspects of being online with multitudes of other players, and they loved leveling up their character and working on their equipment and working on their skills. With World of Warcraft, we put in a great questing system, so right at the beginning of the game, you have objectives. You get pulled right into the world, you have quests filling up your quest log, so you always are doing something for the characters in the environment.
Every time that you log into the game, you can accomplish something. Even though you might not achieve a new level that night of gameplay, you might finish one or two quests, or you might earn a new rank in a trade skill, or explore a new zone. And that was something that we really tried to hit on. That way you're not so focused on the experience bar the entire time you're playing. Your only goal in the game is not necessarily leveling up, but it's completing quests and visiting new areas, learning new skills, sort of always developing your character. And oftentimes players find that they level up and they don't even realize that they're close to leveling.
What you'll notice when you start playing World of Warcraft is the user interface is somewhat minimal. You don't really need a manual to play the game. Everything about the interface is really towards keeping you in the game. We really don't like to have players go to the manual or go to the website just to figure out how to play the game.
The first time that you log in, it's very intuitive and easy to use, but as you become more advanced, you can really customize it to do some pretty powerful things. And a lot of our more experienced players will be able to sort of customize for each of their characters and really get the interface exactly how they like it.
The quest log is another example of our user interface where we always want to make sure that when you're on a quest, you know what you're supposed to do next. A lot of games in the massively multiplayer genre kind of force you to keep notes or to try to keep track yourself of where you're supposed to go or who you've talked to. We expose all that in the quest log. So once again, players, as they're playing the game, can work on their quests and they can stay in the game the entire time they're playing.
Originally, when we started designing quests, we knew that we wanted it to be an integral part of the game. We wanted people in World of Warcraft to have a sense of direction and a sense of purpose right away. So we developed our quest system, which includes a quest log. The quests not only became this sense of fun, but as designers, it allows us to be tour guides almost of the World of Warcraft. There's really no limit to what we can do with our quest systems. As players get to familiarize themselves with World of Warcraft more, they'll realize that quests are almost like the backbone of the game. They really direct the play experience.
World of Warcraft is a class-based game. When you first create your character, you have to choose a class archetype that kind of determines the spells and abilities and, to some extent, the way that you'll play the game. When we approached our classes, we wanted to make sure that our classes felt very Warcraft. We would look at the previous Warcraft games, try to determine what are some of the classic things that people want to be able to create. We looked at things like the Druid, very popular unit type in Warcraft 3, so we brought that over as a class. We looked at the Hunter, which has always been, while not itself a true unit in Warcraft 2 or 3, we've always had this concept of the orcs and the trolls being hunters in the environment, and we brought in the Taurens in Warcraft 3, so the Hunter became a class. We also had the classical classes like warriors and mages. When we started designing the spells and abilities for the classes, we really wanted to make sure that each class played as differently from another class as possible. While we looked at something like the mage was a fairly easy class to develop because we knew we wanted him to have kind of all the classical sort of spells like fireballs and frost bolts and the rest. Once we start working on other spellcasters, we really had to stretch our imaginations a little more to really make them feel different than the mage. When we approached the druid, we wanted to give him nature spells, which are somewhat obvious when you look at Warcraft 3. In Warcraft 3, the druid is a shapeshifter. So we brought that element into the druid class, which really makes them play much different than druids in a lot of other games. Our druid can shapeshift into other animal forms. He can shape change into a bear or a jungle cat. And when he's in these other forms, he actually gets entirely new abilities to those shapeshifted forms. And he'll almost play like an entirely different class. The warrior in a lot of other RPGs and morgs is one of the least interesting classes. The warrior traditionally doesn't really have mana or magic or anything of that nature to lend itself to more interesting gameplay dynamics, so we came up with the idea of rage. And instead of having rage work exactly like mana where it starts at 100%, we decided to have it always start at 0. A warrior would start a combat not very angry, and as he takes damage and as he delivers damage to his foe, his rage bar would fill up, and then the warrior would be able to use his rage to execute his special abilities. With the rogue, we had a very similar sort of struggle trying to come up with things that made him feel different. In his case, we gave him energy, which would work a lot like mana, but would very quickly be used up, but would regenerate really fast. So you'd kind of be using it constantly to do some of your special abilities. As you're attacking an opponent and you execute abilities on them, you build up combo points. And the combo points can be seen in the user interface on any particular creature. And once you have at least one combo point on the creature, you can try to execute a finishing move. So that was a way to really make the rogue play very differently from the warrior, where a lot of traditional morgs, they're very similar classes with just a few different special abilities. And that's really been the approach we've tried to take with all the classes.
I think one thing that defines players in the World of Warcraft is actually the vast spells and abilities that each of the classes gets. A player can be very basic and new to the genre and still be successful and go out, level up, and have a good time. Advanced players or more skilled players have a whole host of abilities to choose from, and I think people can really shine and show their skill off through all of the abilities, and it makes both PvP and PvE environments a lot more exciting.
We felt that player versus player combat was very important to bring to WoW. Each player, depending on which race they choose, is put on a side. They either will be playing for the Alliance, which is composed of the humans, the dwarves, the gnomes, and the night elves, or they can choose a race that's on the Horde, which is composed of the orcs, trolls, taurens, and the undead. By choosing your race, you are choosing a side, which determines when you do engage in PvP, who are your friends and who are your foes. We felt like having a team-based PvP system was a lot more interesting than everyone kind of being out for themselves.
One of the best parts about PvP is it gives you the chance to pit yourself against other players. They're really unpredictable, and the skill levels span the whole spectrum. So PvP kind of gives everybody a chance to show what they've got. It also is a great way when you're sort of done engaging in your normal activities for the night. You've been leveling up and doing quests, and you want to really engage in the World of Warcraft. You want to defend your town, or you want to go raid another alliance's town. It gives you that feeling that the world is real and solid and that you have a purpose in it.
One of the challenges of developing a massively multiplayer RPG is, how do you get people to start grouping in the game? How do you get people to really take part in the community? Well, the tact we took for this was to try to make sure that players could always solo in the game. They could always advance by just playing by themselves, but really try to make sure that there's plenty areas of the game that only can be done when you group up with other players. And we did a lot of different design decisions along the way to try to embrace the philosophy of allowing solo advancement while still encouraging grouping.
There's a lot of cool quests that are more stealth-oriented, and those would be definitely tailored more towards the solo player, so they can deliver items around the world, sneak around, and feel like they're accomplishing things on their own.
Another very important element is the concept of crafting or trade skills. Our approach to trade skills was twofold. We have the concept of a gathering skill, and we have the concept of a crafting skill. Gathering skills, they allow us to make the world much more dynamic. We can have herbs that just spawn throughout the world, that if you have the herbalism gathering skill, that you can go around, find these herbs, and then selling them, or you could use them yourself. We also have mining in the game, which miners would go around with their picks and find veins of ore, silver, or other types of minerals. And it really allows the world to feel much more interesting. It's not just this world that has a bunch of creatures and pretty scenery. There's all these objects throughout the world that people can gather up and use in the trade skilling system. With the crafting skills, we wanted to try to make the making of the items really fun, not just something you go and buy the ingredients from a bunch of vendors and then make something. We wanted to make collecting the elements part of the game itself. We also try to make sure that the ingredients for the recipes to make trade skills are on creatures in the world, or they're in other dangerous places. We really feel like it's a much friendlier system, and it really allows anyone to become a trade skiller and have fun with it.
We've talked about there being the mining gathering skill and the herbalism gathering skill, and those feed into blacksmithing, engineering, and alchemy, respectively. Then there are also just trade skills themselves that are very different. A miner might supply ore to a blacksmith who's going to bang that ore into shape and make swords, make shields, make armor, that sort of thing. But a miner could also supply an engineer. An engineer can make all sorts of cool mechanical items, like a mechanical dragonling, and can make bombs and dynamite, target dummies. And then there's also some trade skills that are almost like a mini game in and of themselves, such as fishing. Fishing is just a great activity. Anytime you're near a body of water, you can throw your line out, you watch your little bobber, and as soon as you see that bobber go down into the water and take a bite, you can pull it up and see what you get. So fishing kind of works very differently from, let's say, tailoring or leatherworking, but also falls within the trade skill system and is very fun and unique.
Another one of the core tenets about World of Warcraft when it comes to what we might refer to as our elder game or end game is that while we really are trying to do a really interesting and deep raid game for guilds that want to take on dragons and these powerful creatures, we didn't want our elder game to only be about raid content. We also are trying to provide high end game PvP content for players, and we also wanted to have our world have a sense of community and have some dynamic things that change throughout the world. In the raid game, a lot of these creatures, as you progress through them, will not even be available when the game first goes live. Like one example that we've talked about is the concept of Outland, which we introduced in Warcraft 3. And Outland is this area that actually is on another kind of planet that is beyond the Dark Portal. And the Dark Portal has been closed for many years. Players on each of the different realms will have to find out how to open the Dark Portal again, and only once the players of each of these realms open that Dark Portal will people be able to go through it and find all the uber creatures beyond that.
Four years have passed since the mortal races banded together and stood united against the might of the Burning Legion. Though Azeroth was saved, the tenuous pact between the Horde and the Alliance has all but evaporated. The drums of war thunder once again. 4 years have passed since the mortal races banded together and stood united against the might of the Burning Legion. Though Azeroth was saved, the tenuous pact between the Horde and the Alliance has all but evaporated. The drums of war thunder once again. Aenara.